Um, so Paul, would you like to go ahead and start? And then we can kind of go from there.
Okay, how do I do that?
Feel free to share your screen and then um, show us what you got.
Oh, here I see. I see. Now I didn't have a toolbar here at the bottom before. Okay, I'm going to give you my whole desktop. And I assume I can minimize the Zoom screen in the process.
Yep.
Um, Actually, before I show you the data one, or the one with the natural language prompt, I did want to show you this. This is what I'm actually working on now as a real case. I'm amazed at how well this works. This is this is a picture of my dog, okay? If you can see it.
Mhm.
And so the application here that I'm interested in is for a client who has a basically is a distributor, I guess I call them, of kind of high-end art. Picasso's, calendars, not the physical painting, but prints, uh, cards. If you go to one of the Museum of Modern Arts, you'll see their stuff. And they have thousands and thousands of images. And they're all online, but they're not described in any way, shape, or form. So I was curious to see if I could do something with OpenAI in that area. So here's a picture that I took of my dog down at the beach a while ago. Her name is Brie, like the French cheese. And I simply asked OpenAI, what do you see in this photo? Here's the answer. This is using ChatGPT 4.0, by the way, the latest version. The photo shows a happy golden retriever sitting on a rocky beach with a body of water in the background. The dog has its mouth open, appearing to be panting, and is looking directly at the camera. It has a leash attached to its collar, and the sky above is clear and blue, indicating a sunny day. The shoreline and water stretch out into the distance with some rocks and driftwood visible on the beach. I find that uncannily accurate.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing.
Um,
it
and
missed the houses on the horizon, but other than that,
uh, doing this with artwork uh, could be extremely helpful to organizations like this and even museums. And this, in fact, can be done. The upload is easily done through the API. So that's where I'm headed next. That's not where I am right now.
That's a good
Uh,
use case, though.
yeah. So I'm going to open the actual example here, hopefully. Come on, open up. There it goes. I have tried it, in client server also. I don't know if you noticed there, but when these charts came up, they actually were dynamic. They grew when I opened them. That's far more, elaborate than what you can do in FileMaker native. And in fact, this is one. I'm going to let this refresh. It hasn't drawn it before. So you drew that pie chart. I can click on a pie and it'll drill down. That's pretty hard to do in native FileMaker. It is using a web viewer and a system called HighCharts, which, unless you want to get rid of the little HighCharts logo at the bottom, is free. Unless you're using it for an application that you're going to shrink wrap in effect and sell over and over again. Okay, back to this. What this does is to let you use different systems. Like here's ChatGPT, and you can pick the model you want to use. Okay. And Anthropic. It's got a couple in there now that still work. This funny one at the bottom is actually their most current. I don't know who is in charge of naming things there. And Mistral, which is the French system, has a bunch that are still active. I find that they all perform, I'd say, reasonably well. But they perform at different speeds, and they often give different results. In fact, if you just use them directly, let me go to one here. I give this same prompt. This is not using, well, actually it did. It used my program because that's the way I test the connection. To the, here's the prompt, what is the best French cheese? You know, my dog is named Brie, so obviously we're interested in cheese. This is with the current model, the GPT-4o, and it gives, you know, a bunch of cheeses, fine. If you use an older model, you're getting a very different response. It's more narrative, not bulleted. GPT-4 is closer to the 4.0, but again, not identical. The same is true with the actual application. What does the actual application do? Well, first of all, let me tell you, the database, the underlying database here is simply a very simple contact management system. It has two major tables, a donor table and a transaction table. The donor table has demographic information about people, you know, where they live, what their history with the organization is, and so on. And there's a transaction table which lists all of the financial transactions that any of these people have had with the organization, and the two tables are obviously linked. One of the things I did find surprisingly was that OpenAI and Anthropic both seem to be able to figure out the relationship between the two tables on their own. It did not need an explicit description of which field in one table links to a corresponding field in the other table. Mistral generated garbage when you didn't give it.
I wonder for those for GPT and I forgot what the other one was called. I wonder how complex Anthropic. I wonder how complex it has to get before it gets confused. They get confused.
Well, yes, it'll get confused if the naming of the fields on the two sides are different.
Okay.
So if you have a field called account number on both sides, for example, OpenAI and Anthropic figure that out and say, okay, I'm going to use that. If it's, you know, account number on one side and AC on the other side, it's not going to figure it out.
Okay.
Mistral does not figure it out, even if they are identical. A bit of
wow.
So here is a donor list. Okay, this is just a bunch of people, and I don't know any of these people, but if you look at one in detail, what you'll see is, you know, data about them. There's actually a picture where, you know, it's an embedded Google map, and that's where they live. These are their transactions. There's a little chart that is generated for them automatically. And you can see what their kind of history over time was. I'm not going to go into that anymore. rather than I'm terrible typer. So what I did was I just created a little library of prompts. So if I just wanted to find donors from Weston, you type in display donors from Weston. There they are. Now what happened? None of this data actually goes to the chatbot. None of it. The only thing that goes is a description of the schema, and in fact, only a limited portion of the schema in this case. So I send it in the prompt, which includes a lot more than this display donors thing. A description of the two tables, okay, and what kinds of fields they are. From that, the OpenAI or whatever generates SQL. And it generates pretty standard SQL. There is what it generated here. Select Bloomerang primary key from Bloomerang, where Bloomerang city is Weston. That's pretty obvious. But it did it. Now, if I choose another prompt that requires cross-table thing like this, display donors from Westport with a transaction for a campaign called concert series, that's a little bit more complicated, but we can still do that search. Okay. And here's what that select, that's the SQL code that it generated. I'm asking, by the way, that it only generate a SQL code that gives me the primary keys of the people that satisfy the search. And that makes it really easy to do the search.
And none of your data went out. You just said, here's my question, and here's my schema that I want you to know about. Create the SQL.
So here is the full prompt that goes out. You don't want to read. Actually, I think I have a more visible version of this. Let me see. Oh, this actually shows the different SQL code generated by the different versions of ChatGPT. Notice sometimes it uses a join and sometimes it uses an inner join. Why? I have no idea, but it does. Okay, here's the full prompt. And they're long. You wouldn't want to have to type this. So all of this is generated by code. So it starts off with, some stuff up here about here is the schema, and it lists the tables with the dashes in front, the various field names. Here's another table that could use one called transactions. Then you have to provide it with a bunch of rules. You don't want it to use perhaps more than, so many tokens, or you want it to only generate select statements, not other SQL statements. How to handle dates. When you're using joins, never use aliases. Some of this has to do with differences between standard SQL commands and FileMaker understanding. Then you actually have to provide the ChatGPT parameters. And all of this goes out as a JSON package. And that little piece right there in bold is the only thing that the user typed in. Everything else is generated by the system, and it tells it which version of the model to use, what the temperature is. This is some text here about what happened with Mistral when it didn't know about how to link the two tables. And it generated invalid SQL code. It won't execute. And it didn't know that. But adding these two lines here that tell which table links to which table through which field made it work. So as a result, I had to write a little code. Let's see if I can find it. Close all these tabs. I don't want to find them all. It's called table relations. There's a FileMaker function, which I rarely use. Maybe you use it more than I do, called, what's it called? Info relations. And it actually gives you for a given table, all of the relationships that are in it. Actually, for all of the tables that are in there. And then you end up having to parse that, which is really, really tedious. But what this does is it comes out, let's see if I can run it by itself. No. I thought I could just run it by itself. It doesn't know what's going on right now. Oh, I need to set this to true. So it found 3 tables. And these are the links. And so this text is actually inserted into the prompt. But if you do it, with this script, you can apply that script to any application you've got. It also limits the number of or the tables that you expose, even their names and contents, to the chat. Soliant actually wrote that code. Let me see if I see where it is. Yeah, that's it. Schema as text, and it goes through all of the tables in your system to figure that out.
If there are multiple TOs, so the same 2 tables.
It works out for the base table.
Okay, but if the base table has multiple TOs and multiple relationships, different ways of relating to the same second base table, because
yes.
How does it work out which of the relationships you want to talk about?
Well, you can give it the
TO name, exactly. Yeah.
When it's developing the list of relationships, you'll see those too. You'll see the TOs.
Oh, okay.
They're never base tables because they're not base tables. In this case, I'm just not including them. I only want links between base tables in this particular application. You can do it any way you like.
Okay.
That's because execute SQL requires a TO.
Yeah.
Not a base table name.
Right.
Right. So that kind of stuff actually works pretty nicely. Let's see. Now I want to show you.
How well does it do at if you give it a name of a field that maybe isn't exactly matching the name of a field, or maybe not close?
Well, that's
How good is
the
it
nice
at
thing about
catching that?
the what do you want to call these things? Chat box is they use kind of a semantic look. I'm not a semantic. What's the word? I forget the word. I've forgotten. It begins with an S though. Where things don't have to match exactly. You can misspell something. In the search that I did before, Do I have two windows open now? Yeah, I do. Let me get this one back.
You didn't necessarily need to send it every field, right? Just so
That is correct, and
Okay.
that is an improvement that really ought to be made.
Your packet doesn't need to be that huge if you say, hey, I'm only searching the fields on this list, which you could also get with a design function, I think.
Right. So you may you often have, various working fields in your system. They may be summary things that you're doing calculations on the full list. Well, that isn't helpful to the search engine.
No.
So you just don't give it that field. I think things like creation date and created by, some of the standard ones, excluding primary key. You want your primary key always, because the SQL has to generate this primary key.
But if you're sitting on a layout, you can get the layout TO and you can tell me what fields are on this layout. And that's what you send it. If you need related, then
well, that's the point. If you
then
need,
you have to do related. Yeah.
that's correct. And so it's not always this layout, because
Yeah.
like this is a list screen. If you go into the detail, there are a whole lot more fields.
Ah, gotcha.
Okay. I have found things like this will work here in ChatGPT. Well, I guess it didn't, because I asked for Paul Davis, but look at how the names are. They're reversed.
But that's a FileMaker.
Because that's the way it is in FileMaker.
Yeah.
But if you look at, and the SQL doesn't know that.
No.
See, in FileMaker is actually Davis, Paul, and so the SQL came back correctly.
But the SQL gets translated into what would be considered a native find anyway. So it may be able to understand that.
Well, the SQL is being executed by an execute SQL command in FileMaker.
Correct, but FileMaker itself translates that execute SQL into what they would consider to be a native type find. So it may understand that FileMaker ability to say my case doesn't matter, my
it doesn't. Yeah, if I took my first name out of there, and did the search, it still didn't find any, because the SQL search is doing a search on the full field, not a partial field.
Okay.
Maybe in the prompt you could include names may be written last, comma first, or they may be written first, last.
Exactly. That's the way around. And this is why the prompts become very important and can get kind of long, and you've really got to test everything out as you go along. I did want to show you so that you're not.
Cool. Thanks.
No. Sorry about that. See, that's gone now, isn't it? Good. Yeah. Let's change systems. I'll go to Anthropic. Notice that changed to Anthropic, and it tells you what model is being used within Anthropic. So now if I go to the donor list and I pick one of these. Okay, here you go. And Restport with a transaction for concert series, and then sort it. I don't think it did it correctly, did it? It did. Oh, it didn't do it at all.
I mean, you could say like Davis or something like that.
There we go.
You mean?
Now it did it. I think you gotta push the little search button, right? Yeah, you could probably do something like that as all also. But it does work across systems. Let's see what the SQL was there. There it is. This is doing an inner join. And then it does an order by.
And
the order by is a phrase within the select. It's not a separate command.
In FileMaker, the inner join is the same thing as a join.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any difference.
And I haven't noticed any difference at in the SQL execution either. In general, I found that the SQL execution, well, on this, and I don't know I forget how many people there are, see there, but just under 6,000. The SQL execution is pretty good. The slow part is uploading the prompt. That takes time. Why it takes the most time the first time you use a particular model. It's a little bit like in FileMaker. I don't know if you ever noticed, sometimes the first find on a list screen like this can be slow.
Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards it's fast, so it's caching.
All right, yeah, it's got the index, it's putting down the indexes.
Yeah.
Once you have the index, I don't know how long it persists, because if you go back half an hour later, it'll be slow again. But
yeah, well, yeah, if you go to another table and do that, eventually the first table of indexes is lost. It has to be regenerated.
This is a digression. Never use execute SQL against a large ESS real SQL table.
Correct.
Well, true. Yeah.
Well, you can do it once. It might take 5 seconds, but if you're going through a loop, it actually loads the entire external table every time you do that.
And then you have to, right.
Yeah, so just never, well, for small tables, it doesn't matter, but.
There are two things that I would mention if you want to play around with this kind of thing. The first is that being proficient in JSON is really, really important, because all of the payloads that go up to the chat and everything that comes back is in JSON format. And sometimes, like with Anthropic, it gets a little complicated because you have a whole cascade of nested objects. I'm speaking JSON now. So it's not quite as easy to set up sometimes.
Well, look at my website for loads of tools on making JSON easy.
Yeah, I got that. I did find, by the way, there is another tool that I found recently where if you have the created JSON, it goes backwards and creates the FileMaker set elements to do it.
Yeah, that if JSON reconstructor on my website.
Oh, is that you have that?
Yeah, and there's another one that I have to go and look. I'm getting old, but the so JSON reconstructor it was designed to take a sample from an API documentation and work out an expression to regenerate that SQL. But at the same time, you can also download the result of an API query and do that, and it will tell you you can do calculations to extract any subpart of it.
Yeah.
Which saves a lot of time. It's okay if you do it all day and you're a very good typist, but otherwise it's really handy to be able to do that.
Well, anyway, the JSON part is key. The other thing you should keep in mind is that, first of all, the data package that you upload that has the prompts in it and what model you're using and so on, that changes system to system. But the other thing that changes is the curl side. The actual header parameters that you provide are different. And some of the standard curl responses are not available in all of the systems. Mistral in particular, everything comes back in one JSON variable, basically, if you want to call it that, or object. Whereas the other ones split things out. If you have an error, you'll get an error object, and you'll get a full text object, and you may get some indication of where in your upload the problem existed. And again, that's a little bit annoying. You have to be very careful when you get a response back to check the response for validity. That is, you're never going to know whether it's accurate or not, but you should be able to check it for an error having occurred in the chatbot. And another reason for understanding how the JSON works. The headers that come back through the curl are not always responsible or reliable. Okay, that's kind of the overview. If you wanted to see, let's see. You've probably seen this kind of stuff before. This was the relations thing. This is the guy who wrote the original underpinning, who created the custom functions. That's his name, and I can't pronounce this. KJ or his initials, and RELJI, unpronounceable. You need to check that the length of your package that uploads is not longer than what the receiving system will accept. If it is, then you have to break the package up and send it piece by piece. This is actually creating the schema table fields, the date. The system prompt, there's a standard, let me see, there's an insert statement up here which has a standard, yeah, here we go. So these are the rules of a system prompt. And it's done with an insert, so all the quotes and things don't have to be escaped, which is really tedious. So this is taken and then gets modified down here with a substitute, which is very similar to what you do in most web viewer systems. And then you actually create the data. Let's see if this makes sense here. Okay, that's what it looks like for OpenAI. Okay, it needs a role, which in this case is system. In the other two things, Anthropic and Mistral, is not system, it's user. And then there's content, which almost always has the prompt in it. In Anthropic, the content also has something else in it. I forget exactly what it is. I think the temperature goes in there. Here, the temperature goes in at the top level, and the model that you're using goes in. And then everything goes up. Ah. This is kind of gibberish. I tend to not put the API keys into the code like this. I have a custom function that contains the API keys, because generally when you set up a database, you make sure that end users don't have access to view or edit the custom functions. And so they never see what the API key is. Can't take it away and use it somewhere else. So I have a custom function that does that, and then I store it into this variable $API key. And this is where that last package of JSON, $data, comes in. And it comes back with, a variable called response. And that's it. Then you have to parse it and do with it as you like. Or in this case, well, a SQL is embedded in it, but you've got to find the SQL in that response. And where it lives is different under different applications.
Of course.
So I think that's enough of an overview, unless somebody has a burning question.
This is very good, Paul. I think you need to write an article or a blog or something.
I do.
Explaining it all, and yeah, and especially like the differences in making those requests can be different in how you create the JSON, and what kind of different results you might get back based on your experience. This is wonderful.
And my early exploration with the images, like my dog, I found that the differences between systems are even more dramatic.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why it is. Well,
yeah.
I kind of understand with OpenAI, because it started out with separate system. DALL-E was not in OpenAI. Or it was not in the ChatGPTs until ChatGPT 4.0. Okay, they were really separate things. And so when they brought it into the DALL-E functionality plus into ChatGPT 4.0, they left the API structure the way it was in DALL-E, which is different than the way it is in the text side of ChatGPT, which is intended to confuse the user, I think. Mistral, on the other hand, the French system, which I tend to prefer, by the way, OpenAI is by far the most expensive of the three systems to actually use. Now, 4.0 has gotten a little bit cheaper than it used to be, but Mistral and Anthropic are both less expensive to actually use. You pay the $20 a month kind of flat fee, but then you pay for tokens as you use it in the month. And the other two systems are less expensive. And with Mistral, they started with everything going into their first major release. And so all of the API calls are consistent. You just have to tell it when you're doing an upload, what kind of upload you're doing. If you're uploading it some text or a general file or an image or a PDF, it wants to know that. But that's a variable or a piece of data in the JSON that you upload. I guess what I don't know is how you decide before you've done anything which system you want to use. Sometimes
I think it's probably trial and error.
Well, that's true. There is a huge limitation to what I've shown you. Since what it comes back with is SQL, it can only do, relational database type searches. If you wanted to find, say, all of the donors who live within 5 miles of downtown Westport, You couldn't do it because the distances between their addresses where people live and downtown Westport is not part of the database. It's not there. So you have to go into this, to get around that, you actually do have to upload the data. And doing that is not trivial. You use this thing called a RAG structure where you first have to, what would I call it? Embed your data, which is to convert all of the text in it to numbers, and it's generally done between a -1 and a +1 with as many decimal points as you want. And that's used to create a vector database, which you really cannot do it. Well, I shouldn't say can't, but it would be ridiculously difficult to do entirely in FileMaker, and that is to create a vector database from that embedded data that you create from FileMaker. And that vector database is what actually goes to the chat box. And the chat box can use that as an extension to what it has already been trained with, the stuff that it got off of the internet. And so that's how you can actually make a personalized system that you can ask much more generalized questions about, because if you uploaded all of this data, for example, through a vector database, it can combine that with what it knows about geography. It can use, Google itself or something like that to figure out how far A is from B.
So if you gave it 2 zip codes and say how far from one to the other, it can go and look it up in Google for you?
Well, I don't know if it literally uses Google to do it, but yes, it can give
yeah.
you an answer.
But it'll give you an answer that may be right or may be wrong, I guess.
Yeah, but zip codes are really strange because
some are quite large and some are quite small geographically.
correct.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it needs to be the address and the zip code.
Yeah, for fine tuning, yeah, if you just generally want to know roughly. Some zip codes are used, there are zip codes for most foreign cities as well in the US Post Office system.
Right.
So in fact, if you put in the zip code for Madrid, it'll tell you can't get there from here or something like that. But
Well, I think you actually have to tell it what country the postal code for another country is from, because they're not just numeric anymore, they're alphanumeric.
oh, okay. No, what I found actually searching Google is that 06830 might actually be used. It wouldn't be because that's Connecticut, but might actually a 5-figure zip code may actually be used by the post office because it has to sort mail to go to foreign destinations, and so it has a sort of shadow set of zip codes for them.
Well, what the better way to do it is you don't use a zip code. You use the you can, from Google, you can get the longitude and latitude of the address.
Yes, you can.
And then you just calculate the Euclidean distance to some address that's downtown Westport, and that's easy enough to do. And the searches, the bots seem to be able to handle that.
Well, that's interesting.
Paul, how do you, if let's say the data that you're sending to the chatbot is your personal information or client data, how would you handle that from a confidentiality standpoint?
Okay, that's what I don't like. And that's why I don't want to send my data up if I can possibly avoid it. All of these chatbots have open source versions, and you can download them, and you can actually build the LLM on your machine and run it locally. And I've done that. And I read what I just out of curiosity to see what it would do. And I ran a search on this. This is a MacBook Pro M3 with 32 gig of RAM and I don't know, a couple of 3 or 4 TB of SSD. So it's, for a laptop, it's got a lot of juice. It took 30 hours. 30.
Wow.
Okay.
How much space does the ILM take up?
So what you would really need to do, and I know some organizations who have done this, is use something like AWS. And you can put your own localized chat box there and actually use, a bunch of processors to do it. You can buy that from AWS and run them there. And that's how, well, Amazon doesn't use AWS. They use their own stuff. When Amazon is using the chat boxes, they're not under AWS. I don't know why that is. It's an AWS system, like system that they run privately in-house. But you can do that, and it has an advantage because generating the vector database, you're going to want to use a system like it's called Pine Tree. I don't know if you ever come across that. Pine Tree is a very clever and not too expensive system to use, but it's cloud-based. So if you're going cloud to cloud, it's not bad. And it will take various kinds of input files, such as CSV files that you just dump stuff out of FileMaker, as input and generate a vector database for you. And then you have to decide which metric you want to use, because the way these semantic systems work is that a vector database is simply every point is described by a whole series of numbers. You can think of them as dimensions. So if you only had 2 things describing your data piece, like height and weight, height and width, they'd each be a coordinate, if you will, in the vector describing a particular point. Well, if you have 500 fields in your table, you're going to have a vector of at least 500 dimensions. Well, how do you decide how far up? The way that the AI system works is it tries to determine how far away 2 vectors are from each other. Is this like that? Well, what is the metric that you use to decide how far away 2 vectors are from each other in a 5,000 dimension space? It isn't easy, and the standard approach is, one is called cosine, which is basically the angle between the 2 vectors, and the smaller that angle is, the conclusion is that they're going in the same direction, so they're more likely to be similar to each other. If they're going in completely opposite, so if the angle is really large and they're going way out like that, then those 2 vectors are dissimilar. That's one way of doing it. There's also Euclidean, like in 2 dimensions, you calculate the hypotenuse of the triangle. Okay, that's how far away the 2 points are. And then there's the other one that's common is called dot product, and I'm not going to try to explain what that means. That's more mathematical. I don't want to get into right now. But Pine Tree will handle all of that, and happily, it directly integrates with OpenAI. So once you put it in there, your vector database is already known to OpenAI, and you can just use it. And it is possible to update a Pine Tree vector database with new data. I haven't actually done that, but people do it. So you don't have to recreate the thing every night or something. There's a lot to do. There's a lot you can do. Unfortunately, at this stage, it requires a lot of learning. And I don't know how stable this environment is. You know, is it going to change completely in 3 months? Maybe. You know, OpenAI, OpenAI announced a couple of days ago that they're working on yet a new major model. And from what I understand, it might be structurally quite different. And so the kind of prompt you need, the kind of package to access it and to tell it what you want done may well change yet again. I find that annoying, especially if you want to build this into a production system and the underpinning of it keeps changing. That's why I've kind of given up on the Google system. It just changes too often. I can't even get a demo to work for more than a week. So be careful. Okay, I think that's enough for me. Justin, do you want to talk?
Sure. Yeah, Paul, thank you. This was great.
All good
Definitely,
stuff, Paul.
yeah.
I'll give you back the screen if I can. Oh, here we go. Okay, there you go.
Definitely, you have gone a lot further in your discovery than I or anybody else in the Q team has. But something that we've done that I'll show the group because I think it's pretty interesting in a real world use case is we have a time tracker, a little tool that we use to enter our time into a FileMaker database that then gets pushed to our main system that we use to invoice our clients and all that. And we built a little tool that when you enter your timesheet and click this button, it turns your timesheet into a timesheet that the client would want to read, so that we could put in kind of the tasks that we worked on, and not have to think about writing it in a way that is digestible for the client. And also in a way where, when we send it to the client, they're going to think, all right, well, that makes sense. That's something that you worked on and not that's a bug or why am I paying for that? And with as minimal effort as possible. So here's just an example of time. This is an example of a task, right? Ensure posted payments reflected on the PDF invoices are shown as listed in the field. So this is a task on a project list, right? And we click this button. And so something that, because we want to make sure that, and obviously we're taking confidentiality really seriously, we want to make sure before we send anything to ChatGPT that we first vet what we're sending and make sure that it doesn't include any confidential information. And actually, and this is kind of something that we did in FileMaker, if you selected a company that this was associated with and the company name was in the list, in the task, it would remove the company name and put client instead, so that the company name doesn't get sent to it. So that's basically what's doing what this is here. We don't have anything. Then we give you the ability to enter any keywords that may be associated with this. So let's say we want to say PDF invoice, and whatever you put in here, when the resulting answer will include this exact phrase. So we want to make sure that PDF invoice is included. Click continue. Now it's doing its thing. So came up with a tagline: confirmed posted payments are accurately displayed on the PDF invoices as listed. So it turned what was a task into a completion.
Mhm.
And what's cool is if you throw it a bunch of things, so we're going to throw it now, I don't know, 4 different tasks all at once and run this. It kind of turns it into a nice little sentence that includes a little bit of all the tasks, but it puts it in a way where it's very positively written. And if you noticed in the original task, one of the tests, and I think this is going to be the original, but this is the actual what I had sent it this time. One of them was debug invoice. We have it so that it took that and instead used resolved, right? Because that's a more softer word for the client. Yep. So this is what I would consider a very basic use case of AI using the GPT LLM, but still a really valuable one for us. And how we built it is actually very simple. Let me go into the scripts. We took the Ronnie Rios, one of the Ronnie Rios demo files. I think this one was the calculations demo file that Ronnie Rios had.
At Engage.
We basically just replaced, at Engage, and we basically copied it into our database, had it fit our purposes and replaced a few different things. And so one of the things that we replaced was the prompt. So, because obviously we're not asking for a calculation anymore, but we sent it this prompt of rewrite the following. Yeah, I guess it's simple enough. Rewrite the following into a 1-sentence software consulting timesheet. The sentence must be 20 words or less. If the original message is less than 10 words, the sentence must be less than 10 words. What we found is if we said can or should, if we gave it any word that wasn't very directive, it kind of did what it wanted with it.
Yes.
If we said it should be less than 20 words, then it would say, well, it should be, but it doesn't always have to be. So we had to change to use the word must and always and do not. You have to be very directive. The sentence must use a positive action-oriented tone. And then we said if there's keywords included, the sentence must include the following words or phrases, comma separated, written exactly as shown. And that's another thing we found is we said we said the sentence must include the following words or phrases and didn't say written exactly as shown and even give it an example, it would use, like in my previous example where I said PDF invoices, it would use PDF and invoices in the sentence, but separately, or it would use like PDF invoice. It wouldn't use that exact phrase. And for us, it's really, it's important when we're putting a phrase for a keyword that it shows up exactly as we wanted it. Sentence must be past tense and start with the verb. And then we put in capitals, the sentence cannot use any of the following words: fix, bug, problem, issue, internal meeting, kind of trigger words that our clients don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And we also said, do not make any assumptions, because we also found that it would assume, we would say, for example, file optimization in the what we sent it, and it would make up like a whole story. It was like, somebody going, committing perjury on the stand. And then we give it a bunch of examples, and I'll show this in.
Yeah, they do like examples. I found that also.
Yes, they definitely like examples. And what I found interesting, what I found interesting is even if we give it examples and we give it an exact, like if we send to it this exactly, it won't return the example that we give it, which I would, you know, if you told me this is an example and this is what I want you to return, and I give you this, I'm expecting for you to return this example, and I can show you what it does. But essentially, we gave it kind of a verbose one, and it, you know, turned it into a sentence. We gave it a simple one. We gave it one where it's just kind of bland, and gave it a response. And then, you know, so we just gave it a few different examples, and you can give it as many examples as you want. And then finally, you know, you send it the message there, and then, you know, similar to what Paul was showing, you give it the model that you want. And we're using the GPT-4o. And it's pretty simple, and the same, this is all the same that Paul was just showing us. And that, so when we actually run this, so I'll just show kind of what we're actually sending to GPT. I think at that point we haven't even done that. So let's look at that. That did I not spell that correctly? Oh, $2. And so here we're giving it, so this is essentially the prompt, right? Then example 1, and then we're telling the assistant what we're expecting is the assistant to return. Example 2, what the assistant's returning. 3, what the assistant's returning. 4, the assistant. And then here we're sending it the sentence and expecting that the result is going to be what the assistant returns to us. So I found this kind of interesting. It's almost like we are on the ChatGPT website talking to ChatGPT and telling them this is the prompt, and then we've sent them one, and then they've responded to us, and then we've sent them another one, and they responded to us, and then we sent them another one, they responded, sent them another one, they responded, and now we're sending them this one, and now waiting for a response. You can almost think of this as a conversation that we're playing for ChatGPT of what has already occurred in the ChatGPT, you know, text message thread.
Very cool.
I thought that was kind of interesting. So I think that's all I have to show here. If there's any questions or anybody wants me to show anything, I'd be happy to go through that.
Did find something similar to what you're referring to. I had to add into the prompts kind of stern statements, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you see this, do this.
Yeah.
The strength of the way you say it seems to influence whether the ChatGPT at least pays attention to it.
I think somebody explained this to me. It's almost like having a new employee who's really smart but knows absolutely nothing, right? So, you know, when you have somebody and you're trying to teach them, you have to be really directive at the beginning.
They learn fast, but they do have to learn.
Exactly. And you know, with ChatGPT, it's not learning from every time we send them things, because every time we send them something, it's a completely new conversation. Obviously, if you had your own learning language model, you know, in your basement, it would start learning based on what you're saying. But this is the giant, open platform that has millions of requests every second. So it's not going to really, it would take a lot of messaging from you back and forth with it for it to actually learn something from what you're sending it specifically.
I heard somebody say that it could be wrong, but it's very polite about it.
Yes.